Tête-à-tête avec un artiste.
On est très heureux d'ouvrir cette série de Tête-à-Tête avec Irma Boom et Pierre Audi. Irma Boom est une très grande artiste du livre et par ailleurs, elle est responsable de ces incroyables signatures graphiques du festival, déclinées, réinventées année après année. Je vais leur laisser la parole pour un très bel échange.
Il y a pas de... Ah oui, ça marche? Oui. Bonsoir à toutes et tous.
But we speak English.
We speak English,
Yeah.
Irma, don't worry. La discussion va se faire en anglais. J'espère que ce n'est pas un grand problème. Je peux essayer de traduire de temps en temps si vous voulez. Je vais essayer, mais pas tout sera traduit. Je ferai de mon mieux. Alors, juste pour... on commence donc... c'est la première fois que je participe à ces midis. Et ce que Timothée a organisé est vraiment remarquable pour le festival. Il y a vraiment des rencontres fascinantes qui sont prévues. Mais nous avons travaillé pendant plus de 5 ans avec Irma maintenant pour en fait créer la peau du festival. Donc on commence avec la peau avant de rentrer dans le corps. Et cette peau, on l'a confiée à Irma, qui est, je pense que je n'exagère, que ce n'est pas une exagération ni un compliment de dire qu'elle est une des plus grandes graphistes au monde, parmi les peut-être 3 plus grandes au monde aujourd'hui. Et on a énormément de chance de travailler avec elle. On se connaît depuis extrêmement longtemps. Plus de 30 ans. We know each other more than 30 years. No? Yeah.
When you arrived in Amsterdam,
Voilà.
you invited me actually.
Alors, quand je suis arrivé à Amsterdam, donc je devais aussi m'occuper de la peau de l'Opéra d'Amsterdam. Et j'ai contacté Irma, qui n'était pas aussi connue qu'elle est aujourd'hui. Et en fait, j'étais très tenté de travailler avec elle, mais en fait, je l'ai rejetée. I rejected you.
Yes. For shame.
In
Shame.
1989,
Yes.
I think I rejected you.
Why?
I think
Now I can ask you.
I think I rejected you because your work was so subtle, so refined, that I thought maybe we need to be a bit louder. Le travail était tellement subtil, tellement raffiné, que j'ai pensé que peut-être qu'on avait besoin d'une voix un peu plus marquée pour l'Opéra des Pays-Bas, pour créer une nouvelle image de l'Opéra des Pays-Bas. Mais on est restés amis pendant très longtemps et dès qu'il y a eu la première grande opportunité de commander un livre important, ça a été le 50e anniversaire de l'Opéra d'Amsterdam. Je l'ai dirigé pendant 30 ans, donc l'opéra à l'époque, j'étais plutôt vers les 25 ans, donc c'était pratiquement la moitié de l'histoire de cette institution. Et là, à ce moment-là, j'ai décidé de casser et j'ai dit à Irma, le grand livre du 50e anniversaire, c'est toi qui dois le faire. Et elle a fait un livre extraordinaire qui, comme tous ses livres, va rentrer dans l'histoire. Donc, à partir de ce moment-là, je n'ai travaillé avec personne sauf toi. From that point on, we started really working together. Donc, quand je suis venu ici, j'ai identifié qu'il fallait raconter une nouvelle histoire avec une nouvelle image, une nouvelle façon d'être graphique, puisqu'on ne peut pas montrer les productions, il y en a tellement. We cannot show all the productions, we have to do it in another way. Et donc, j'ai proposé à Irma de réinventer le graphisme du Festival d'Aix Et cette aventure, this adventure got deeper and deeper and deeper. Maintenant, nous sommes au 75e anniversaire. Et finalement, je trouve que cette année, son travail a trouvé une sérénité artistique. Et vous le verrez aussi quand vous prendrez les programmes des différents opéras. Elle a fait cette année un travail absolument génial sur les programmes. The programs are amazing.
You're so kind.
Non. But, donc, je propose d'avoir une conversation comme ça avec Irma on two levels. One about your work. I think a lot of people will be very interested to know, what you really do. 2 weeks ago, you presented your masterpiece, the smallest book in the world, to the Pope. And you have to tell that story, because that's important. Il y a 2 semaines, elle a présenté son chef-d'œuvre, qui est le livre le plus petit au monde, au pape François, au Vatican. Donc, elle va vous raconter cette histoire. Mais il y a aussi, the other side is that you tell a little bit about what is behind the graphics of X and how over the years this has been interesting for you. Yeah. But maybe let's start with you, with your work. Maybe, of course, you don't need to go through your whole career, but you can say a few things that you think are important and interesting, that give you pleasure, that maybe, help the people to get to know you.
And otherwise you interrupt. If
No, it's fine.
So I wanted to become a painter. So I'm a book designer mainly, but I was already when I was a small child, I was always painting. So my wish was to go to art school and to become a painter. And of course my parents didn't like it. They said, you have to become a lawyer or become an architect, but not an artist. And I said, well, I really want to become a lawyer, which I think is really a very important profession. And I said to my mother, who was mainly against it, but first I go to art school and then I will study law. And she said, deal, of course. Funny that she accepted this. But anyway, I went to art school and I was painting, but all my heroes like Ellsworth Kelly or Agnes Martin or Schoonhoven, so all these people I admire so much, I always thought it's already there what I think is really good. And I was a bit disappointed in myself that I couldn't find something else. And if you are an artist, you have to work a lot. And of course I worked really a lot, but I knew there's something missing. And so at the art school in Enschede in the Netherlands, I was wandering through the school. I thought maybe I should become an architect or maybe a photographer. But then in one classroom, there was an artist, actually, who brought every Wednesday 2 suitcases with books. And this person would talk about books. He would recite from these books. He would tell something about the scale and why an atlas is big and why a poetry book is smaller. And he would read about it and he would talk about content and form. And I think that thing interested me most, because to make something is how we can do. But when it really makes sense, so when content and form comes together, and when it's not only a design but also something based on an idea, then it becomes interesting. And at some point he showed, from a Dutch writer, Jan Wolkers, he showed 2 books, Horrible Tango and Turkish Delight. And he said, this designer made typographic covers in very bright colors, in neon colors. And he said, it's so interesting that this book covers have only type that really represent the content so well that these are masterpieces. And I knew the books because my brothers and sisters were not allowed to read these books because they're very sexual and avant-garde. So it was really something. But my parents knew what was inside, so they had read the books. But the children were not allowed to. But anyway, so I thought maybe that is something I can try to make books. And since that moment, I never touched a brush anymore, and I was only into typography and books. And the good thing is that the designer of those books is a person called Jan Vermeulen. It's a very common name in the Netherlands, but Jan Vermeulen was not only a designer, was himself a poet and also a teacher at art school in Arnhem. And I went to this art school in Arnhem because my mother told me to go to something applied. And one of the people who interviewed me at the art school in Arnhem was Jan Vermeulen. And he already said then, you don't belong here. You're an artist. You have to go to the fine art department. But anyway, so this Jan Vermeulen made also these books. And the funny thing is, for me, is really an interesting thing, that I think 20 years later, I meet a very nice person called Julius Vermeulen. And I said, and Vermeulen is really a common name. But I said, are you related to Jan Vermeulen? And then he said, it's my father. So I thought I'd never let this person go, because it's the reason why I became a book designer. And I only concentrated on books. So, and I think if you do, because graphic design is an enormous field, especially now with the digital media. But I absolutely believe in the object and content of the book. I think the book is our memory, and that's also what I found out, because since 5 years I do a study at the Vatican Library in Rome, or in Vatican City to be precise. And if you see all these wonderful books they have there, then you also know if you make a book, and there are some commissioners here in the audience, if you make a book, you don't make a book for the past or for the present, you make a book for the future. And I think that is for me also the trigger to keep on making books. Of course I'm interested in digital media. I could never be this book designer if there was no digital media, because I can really focus even more on the idea of what that book is. And so printed matter is something unchangeable, where a website or a digital media is flux. You can change it every minute. But the interesting thing, or the disadvantage of print, is the unchangeable. And I think that is for me, and I think it's also a bit proven nowadays, that the unchangeable is the quality of what a book is. So it's the memory. And you can always revert to a book, to content, to statements, to issues, and if you revert to these books, you can always bring up new ideas and come with new statements. But it's a huge reference, and that's for me important. And I think that's also so nice that we make printed matter for this festival, because it's also an evidence. It's really an evidence that it's there.
Irma nous a parlé de son début. Elle voulait être peintre. Elle est allée finalement vers une école d'art. Elle a découvert le livre. Elle s'est arrêtée sur le livre, qui était devenu très tôt une fascination pour elle. Et donc son parcours s'est concentré sur ça. Elle explique aussi que le livre, c'est un objet pour le futur. Ce n'est pas un objet pour le passé ou le présent, mais pour le futur. Et on se demande, bien sûr, avec la révolution numérique, nous qui, au Festival d'Aix, vont passer au numérique, mais on est dans un tourment, puisque nous avons parmi nous une grande artiste du livre. En même temps, on est en train de dire au revoir au livre. Donc on ne pourra pas dire au revoir complètement au livre. On va trouver une manière de garder ce livre qui fait partie du futur parmi nous, Nous sommes cette année dans une année mémoire. We are in this memory, 75 years. On est en train de préparer un livre qui va sortir l'année prochaine. Et bien sûr, c'est Irma qui va le faire. On réfléchit à des objets pour le futur. Mais ce qu'elle a entamé pour nous est primordial. Et c'est une feuille de route pour essayer de trouver une façon de rester dans la communication, puisque maintenant le public s'est habitué justement à ce que nous a proposé. Elle a récemment fait une grande résidence au Vatican, à la fameuse bibliothèque du Vatican. C'est très très rare d'avoir quelqu'un admis là-dedans, mais elle a donc trouvé son trajet vers le pape lui-même. You ended up with the Pope himself.
Yes, 2 weeks ago, indeed. Yeah.
So that's very beautiful. Et voilà, donc elle nous a parlé un tout petit peu de sa carrière, de son ligne. Would you like to say something about your experience with X, your experience with developing this graphic form for us, and what it means to you, and how over the years this has evolved? Because, you know, I've seen you become more and more involved in it, and this involvement, you feel it. You feel it in the quality of the work. It's very touching. And anyway, the festival is very grateful to you for what you've done. You know, it's really...
Merci beaucoup. But maybe a little bit back to the why the Vatican is so interesting, because I'm a book designer, and I'm always also part of the editorial board. It's not just putting a book together and images and text and make something. No, it goes much further and deeper. And I do experiment with books. There are some books here which are very fat and have no page numbers, and I'm highly criticized about many of the books I've made over the 35 years or so. And but what for me is interesting, that researching at the Vatican Library, basically I asked the question, what happened to the book? Because the book regressed since Gutenberg. Basically, there's 50 years or so that it's really interesting that they are finding out, others Manutius and all these people, what is a book and how, from the manuscript to the incunables, they were experimenting. So there was a lot of freedom. And if I compare, and that's also mainly the part I'm researching, and also, so after Gutenberg, I did research also manuscripts, but for me, as the only graphic designer or bookmaker in the Vatican Library, because it's only for scholars, I'm the only not scholar, but I do the study, and I created myself a subject, and that's also why I asked for so many different books that nobody asked for, that the cardinal got complaints. So the head of the library got so many complaints from the people in the library because I was not researching one book, because there are all these scholars research one book and they spend 3 months on it, but I did 10 books a day, and then the next day another 10 books, and I would go back and forth, and so I was really checking out books. So they were complaining, and so I had to go to the cardinal, and which is very special because it's not somebody you meet. And so everybody in the library said, well, they were gossiping and sort of whispering, she has to go, probably she will be kicked out because she has to go to the cardinal. But what happened, the cardinal was highly interested in what I was doing. And it's now another person, but he was a Portuguese poet. So he was basically on my side, and he wanted to know everything about me. And he said, I really don't know who you are, and people are complaining about you, but I really want to know more about you. Come this afternoon, we have a book presentation, and let's get together. So it was a complete surprise for me that it was something else. And that afternoon, and with him, I couldn't speak English because I don't speak Italian, really un poco. And so it had to go via a huge nun, Angelica. She had to do the translation. And it was very funny. So in the afternoon, I went to the book presentation in the library with all the frescoes. And there, this cardinal came to me, Cardinal de Mendonça, and he did really like this. Oh, I thought, oh my God, he knows that I'm looking also for some juicy books in the Vatican Library. And but he really spoke in English to me. He said, I Googled you. We need to talk. And it was so funny. So suddenly he spoke English and he Googled me. And he said, come the next day, come again to my office. We have to make a plan. And so the next day I came, I went back to the cardinal. And then he said, you get every access you want. You get every support. But you should also give something to us. So let's find a way how we can exchange. So that was fantastic. So books I was never allowed to see. I said, well, you have to show it to me. And they said, no. So, well, call the cardinal. You have to show it. And so it was really super interesting. And at some point he said, they exactly know what I'm looking for because you get special codes, so they know exactly my record. And he said, we need to make an exhibition. So with your work, with your study, and with another element. And that happened also from November to last February. I had a fantastic show in the Vatican Library. But so that, to talk about it, the books I've seen after just after Gutenberg, so after the first printed books, are very experimental. So, and all the things I was criticized for were made then. So that gave me a huge confidence. And we both got the Johannes Vermeer Prize. And so I used the Johannes Vermeer Prize for a library. I have now a library with books from the 14th and 15th century and from the 60s and 70s of the last century. And if you put these books together, it's amazing how they fit. And if another element is my own books. And that's really a very interesting combination. And going back to the logo, because it's not easy. If you see what was done before for Festival X, was very figurative and very with a lot of art and drawings. And when you ask me to think about the logo, I think the name is fantastic, X. I think it's so beautiful. And I was thinking, how can I do something with X? And if you look at the letters, it's the A, the I, and the X. They're so graphic. And if you put them in a square, I don't know why I did it. I cannot really explain it. But if you play with it, and also if you make a logo, you should make something you can play with. If you cannot play with a logo, then it hardly has existence. So you have to make something what is also has a sort of artistic quality. And I also remember when I showed it to you, I think the first version was pink and green, neon colors. And you said, but what about the artistic element? Who is doing the artistic element? And then I said, yeah, I'm doing it because I wanted to play with the elements of the logo. And over the 5 years that I'm doing it now, and every year has a new color combination, always one color from the previous year. Yeah. So it's developing. It's really an ongoing story. I got to know the logo also better. I see more and more details in the logo to work with. And also because we do it already 5 years, so the 6th year will be even more a challenge. And so I have to look better. And that's also what I learned at the Vatican Library, is looking. Because in the Vatican Library, you're not if you look at books, there are some books on the screen. You are not allowed to take photos. You're only allowed to write things down. And so the looking, I think also from drawing models, of course, I learned how to look. But to look at something, you always see more. You see more and more and more. So for me, looking at the logo and I always discover new things. So I hope we can. The longer we do it, the more a challenge it is, but the more exciting, I think, because it becomes more and more abstract, I think.
Yeah. No, it's I mean, the blue and yellow was actually an accident. We didn't think about Ukraine at the time. It was an accident because it was made, I think, a year before the Ukrainian war. So we didn't do it on purpose, but it was exactly at the right moment.
Yeah, and those things happen. If you're really into something, those coincidences, in Dutch you would say toevallen, things fall to each other. And that is what happens if you're really very intense involved in something, I guess.
Well, je pense que vous devriez regarder, par exemple, il y a beaucoup de subtilité dans ce que Irma fait. Vous devriez bien regarder les programmes et les livres, parce qu'il y a beaucoup de subtilité dans la façon dont le livre est organisé graphiquement. Les secrets, ce ne sont pas des choses qui sont tape à l'œil, mais ce sont des objets très raffinés, très forts. Et nous n'avons pas beaucoup parlé de ça, mais je voulais justement mettre l'accent sur ça, parce que pour nous, l'équipe du Festival d'Aix, ça veut beaucoup dire, ça a joué un grand rôle, et j'aimerais aussi sentir que le public peut apprécier exactement ce qu'on est en train d'offrir avec ces livres. Et parce qu'il y a beaucoup d'amour et d'attention qui rentrent dans ce détail.
And I think what is interesting, so it works as print, but I think what the team does on Instagram and digital media, how they play with it, you can make it like you can turn it. There are so many elements. They can create so many things, which I think for me is also very exciting to see how they, how it not only works as print, but it's very vivid in digital media.
Yeah, but for me, I say it in French. Pour moi, ce n'est pas possible de résumer dans une image ce que le Festival d'Aix fait. Donc le départ de cette abstraction, elle vient de l'impossibilité de présenter au public sur une affiche ce que le Festival d'Aix fait. C'est un indicatif que le festival est là. C'est un moment graphique qui invite le public à prendre connaissance du festival. Mais l'affiche ne peut pas résumer ce que le festival a à offrir. C'est comme une feuille de musique. On voit cette feuille, on peut l'admirer, et puis il faut écouter la musique. Donc c'est ça, c'est deux temps. I was saying that it's not possible to encapsulate what the festival is in a poster. Because of the complexity of what we do here. We do opera, but we do so much more. But the graphics, for me, are like looking at a sheet of music. You can see the sheet of music. It can fascinate you as a piece of writing, but you have to go to the festival to hear the music.
And actually see it. It's your imagination.
That's it. Yeah.
And maybe something about the colors. What I also had, every time I'm here, the sun shines here. And I think that the logo and the colors we are using has also something to do here with the climate. I think it's really the sun and the colors make it very optimistic and very positive, and I think that is also good. For this 57 year, we are using stripes, and for me it's also nice that in the, how do you call it, the heraldic thing from Aix-en-Provence, there are also stripes. So it's also a petit hommage à Aix, to the city. I think it's really a sort of. A sort of wink to the heraldic. How do you shield?
C'est un lien avec l'insigne héraldique de la ville d'Aix, qui est représenté par ces lignes de couleurs. Donc elle fait un lien avec ça, mais aussi avec le soleil, qui joue un rôle important à Aix. Et donc il fallait quelque chose de solaire. Et le soleil a été une inspiration pour les couleurs. The sun was an inspiration for the color schemes.
And a lot of white, so not too dark. It's all very, very bright, very light and colorful.
Yeah. What did you present to the Pope?
So it was the audience. There were 150 people invited, only artists from the Netherlands, Rem Koolhaas, but also André Rieu, which is very funny. But he's super popular in Italy and in Germany, and I guess also in the Netherlands. But there were Laurie Anderson was there, Jean Nouvel, composers, film directors. So it was a lot of interesting people, and the idea was because the Vatican museums have now 50 years modern art. So if you go to the Sistine Chapel, you have to go through modern art. So you see Fontana, you see Matisse. And so you have, and that is, I always forget which pope it was, but it was on purpose that to the most popular thing, you have to go through the rooms or the galleries with modern art. And this was basically a celebration of modern art. But for me, the scene was extremely interesting. We were in the Sistine Chapel, which I think was amazing, because they have audiences in all places in the Vatican, but that the artists were invited in the Sistine Chapel. But the backdrop was basically, you saw the Pope sitting and all these naked men falling as a backdrop. I thought it was super interesting because Michelangelo made it. But can you imagine that you can never make it now, but it could have been made then, and then naked, the naked body was something else. But seeing the Holy Father in front of these naked men, I thought it was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful scene. It was really, I think that for me was the best part. But the Vatican people asked me to give a book because nobody gave anything. But they asked me specifically, can you give the Kelly book? I made it's also over there. Can you give the Ellsworth Kelly book to the Pope? But that's a black box, and I thought, I cannot come with a black box, that's not nice. So I decided to give my own book, my catalog, because also in this catalog is my study of the Vatican. And so I explained to him that this is my work and that I do already for more than 5 years a study in the Vatican, and that this book contains my work and very interesting books from the library. And he was really happy. So he was very kind.
You managed to put your entire life into this tiny little book.
Yes. Yeah, and the book rose every year 3%, and the first book was super tiny. The second book was already a little bit bigger, and I hope I become 100, or maybe not, I don't know. But if I become 100, the book will be 21 centimeters high, because I follow the Japanese idea that you always have to become better. I made about 500 books, but it doesn't mean that these books are all good. Some are good, some are not so good, some are even bad, because it's always trying and to create something. And if you create something, sometimes it's good and sometimes not so good. And for me, it's really to show that you have to work. You have to have discipline. You have to work, and if you do it again and again and again, hopefully, at some point you get to sublime. But I never know. But so it's doing it and working on it, and that's why I allow the book to grow every year 3%. And if I have an exhibition, which I had last year, I had 3 exhibitions: one in the Allard Pierson, in the Vatican, and in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. So that was a reason to produce a book. And this book is called the Manifesto of the book, because I honestly and truly believe in print. And I also think that print becomes more and more relevant and important, and as a contrast to the flux, what I already said. And I have the feeling that also reading, we should stimulate people to read, because a lot of people say, oh, people don't read anymore. And I think that might be true, but people read a lot on their iPhones, of course, although it's small text, and reading literature or bigger parts of text is something else. You learn from it, and you get better vocabulary. But I also think, and I know that in the 15th century, so after Gutenberg, they were also complaining about that people don't read. And then they started to make pocketbooks. So the first pocketbook was to help people to read. So these small books, and Aldus Manutius, the Venetian publisher and printer, he said, if we make books accessible for a large audience for a good price, then hopefully people read. So he wanted to really democratize the book, and I think that's really interesting. And of course, I also want to follow his ideas. But I think in these days of internet, a book is also something else. Because an atlas or a dictionary can better be a digital file, but some books can better be a printed object. And so I think if you really think about when and why to make a book, I think then the book has an enormous, how do you say that, future.
Listen, we're very lucky to work with you. We're thrilled to work with you.
I'm lucky too.
Yeah, and,
yes, thank you so much.
And I wanted you to meet some of our audience today and to give an accent on what you have developed with us over the years. And I think your influence and your plaidoyer for the book is something we have to listen to at the festival somehow. We have to move towards digital, but you are helping us to find a way to keep the book, there to witness for future generation what there was, because the digital will disappear. Donc, je remercie beaucoup Irma.
Can I say one more thing? I just saw one of the books I saw in the Vatican, which is a square. It's a square with typography. Yeah. And I can show it also in here later. But that is also very interesting. That's a book from the 9th century. And it's a book, it's a Laudatio on the cross, and it's poetry. You can read poetry in the diagonal, vertical, horizontal. And if I think of the logo for X, which is also a square, and it has also that playfulness in all directions, I think that is. It was not an inspiration source, but it's really interesting.
Connection.
It is a connection. It's definitely a connection, and that's why I think that old and new is for me very much related, very much. And I really treasure tradition, but I don't want to stop there. I always want to go further, but I'm very aware of the tradition.
But that's certainly what we do in relation to opera and music here. We're looking at the past, but we're thinking all the time about the
ahead,
future.
always go
Always
ahead.
ahead.
Yeah.
So this movement is also in the programming, and that's the connection.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting que cette forme carrée, elle l'a trouvée dans un livre du 9e siècle, dans la bibliothèque du Vatican, qui était un livre de poèmes sur la croix. Donc que le livre, il est inventé, mais il a existé, il a eu une forme expérimentale qu'elle a découvert au Vatican et qui a joué un très grand rôle pour elle dans sa recherche. Et this one, yeah. Yeah.
You can see it later. It's really interesting. Yeah.
Irma, thank you so much for coming today, for being with us on the opening day of the festival.
I'm very honored.
Yeah.
Thank you very much as well. Merci beaucoup.
I think it's really nice to be able to remind people and also draw attention to this work, which for us at the festival has played a very big role. And I hope that this gift that Irma gave us helps to connect also the public with what they see in the theaters, what they hear in the concerts. I
It's
think that's
modernity, right?
It's a meeting of discovery and surprise. Un festival, c'est un moment de célébration, mais c'est aussi un moment de découverte et de surprise et de recherche qu'on ne peut pas avoir avec des institutions pérennes toute l'année. Mais dans le contexte d'un festival, il y a un espace de réflexion qui est organisé et nous invitons nos spectateurs à participer à cet espace, à trouver leurs propres réponses aux questions que nous posons, qui sont posées bien sûr par les artistes qui créent ici, qui font de la musique, qui créent des spectacles, et aussi par une personne comme Irma, qui est une artiste graphique du livre et qui aussi participe à notre aventure à sa manière. So thank you so much, Irma, and
Thank you.
I hope you enjoy the performances at your seat.
Thank you.